straddling two worlds. Within days, Venezuela's opposition leader has individual meetings with Pope Leo and then Donald Trump, who have opposing ideas of what should happen next in Venezuela. A Catholic archbishop in Venezuela and the former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See discuss how the Vatican might influence what happens there next. A country unravels. Thousands take to the streets in Iran to protest the brutal regime of the Ayatollah and Muslim clerics who have ruled with an iron grip there for decades. We have expert analysis of the situation. And the results are in about America's National Eucharistic Revival. A newly released report details how a refocus on the Eucharist and evangelization is impacting the Catholic Church. EWTN News in Depth starts now.
I presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize.
María Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, visits the White House and hands her prize medal to President Donald Trump, who has frequently spoken about his desire to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Welcome to EWTN News in Depth. I'm Catherine Hadro. In what was a bit of a split-screen scenario this week, Machado met separately with Pope Leo XIV and then with President Trump as she seeks support in her fight to lead her country after the American capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. Yet the pontiff and the president are suggesting two vastly different approaches to Venezuela's future. Mark Irons reports.
At an annual procession in Venezuela honoring the Virgin Mary this week, the people continue to reflect on their future. This woman says they are praying for peace.
We pray for our country because the country truly needs God, firstly.
The procession taking place around 200 miles west of Caracas, the capital where President Nicolás Maduro was removed from power after a U.S. raid earlier this month. Pope Leo XIV has said peace in Venezuela and sovereignty must now prevail.
I renew my appeal to respect the will of the Venezuelan people and to safeguard the human and civil rights of all, ensuring a future of stability and concord.
On Monday, Venezuelan opposition leader María Corina Machado met with the Pope at the Vatican, asking him to advocate for the release of political prisoners still held in Venezuela. Machado then visited President Trump at the White House on Thursday, giving him her Nobel Peace Prize. The Norwegian Nobel Institute said the prize cannot be transferred or shared. She also met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Machado's political party is widely considered to have won the 2024 elections in Venezuela, but those results were rejected by then-President Maduro, who remained in power. We met Carlos Moya, a Venezuelan living outside Washington, D.C., who says the Venezuelan presidency rightfully belongs to Machado's party.
Maduro
has never been a legitimate president. Maduro is a dictator. He stole the elections.
Moya says he fled his home country 12 years ago.
Staying in Venezuela would have been a death sentence, or a sentence of political persecution in the dungeons and in those inhumane prisons.
He's outside the vacant former Venezuelan embassy building in Washington. In 2019, President Maduro announced he was cutting diplomatic ties with the U.S., but the Venezuelan opposition government, recognized by the U.S. at the time, occupied this space until it finally closed in 2023. The Venezuelan flag no longer flies here, and signs of the abrupt closure are still evident behind the locked doors. On the other side of the glass, you can even see a pile of old mail, which includes a dated edition of China Daily, a propaganda paper of the Chinese Communist Party.
The future of U.S.-Venezuelan relations remains unclear. Venezuela hasn't had a normalized, functioning embassy here in Washington for years, but some exiles hope that this shuttered consulate will reopen in the near future.
Moya is one of them. If presidential elections are held in Venezuela, he wants his vote to count.
We Venezuelans who are here and reside in the United States of America cannot vote, so the opening of the embassy and consulates would be a mechanism for us to exercise our right to vote here in the United States.
This week, U.S. forces seized another oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea, aiming to control the flow of oil coming to and from Venezuela. But what's next for the Venezuelan government is unknown, including when elections might occur. So far, President Trump has questioned Machado's ability to run the country, instead signaling his administration's willingness to work with Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, who was the vice president under Maduro. Jorge Galicia, a Venezuelan who protested the Maduro regime for years before fleeing to the U.S. in 2018, says he supports Machado, but believes the Trump administration endorsement of Rodriguez might be a pragmatic move to ensure some level of temporary stability in Venezuela before a transition of power.
I don't necessarily like it. I hope it comes to an end as soon as possible, but at the same time, I understand the reasoning behind it. You need someone who can have control of the armed forces within Venezuela.
Galicia says he was happy with Maduro's removal.
I've been praying to God for such a long time to see some sort of justice and to also have the possibility to safely return to my country.
Still in touch with friends and family back home, he described Venezuelans as silently optimistic about their future without Maduro. But at the same time, people aren't openly celebrating his ouster out of fear of retribution.
A lot of people are still living in fear. You people go outside their houses, they're not talking about what happened, they're just pretending it never happened.
Archbishop Jesus Gonzalez de Zarate is president of the Venezuelan Bishops' Conference. He spoke to us from his office in Caracas. He says the bishops are following events closely, but what happens next in Venezuela remains uncertain, so they are exercising a certain degree of caution as they continue ministering to the people.
It is up to us to provide pastoral accompaniment, encouraging the people to keep hope alive and to continue presenting the great principles of the Church's social doctrine.
The Archbishop says daily life for citizens and workers has gradually resumed since the U.S. raid, but people have many questions and concerns. And he pointed to the recent words of Pope Leo, who prioritized the good of the Venezuelan people first and foremost.
Recognition of sovereignty, of international law, of the self-determination of peoples, of the search for paths of understanding and progress. This is the aspiration of the Venezuelan people.
For 25 years, he says relations between the Catholic Church and state institutions have not been easy, and the Church has been marked by the difficulties inherent in life in Venezuela, by a general impoverishment not only of individuals but also of the Church as an institution. However, there have been signs of hope. He mentioned the recent canonizations in Rome last October of the first Venezuelan saints, and says the general public has found inspiration in them.
They have seen in these Venezuelans, in their way of living Christianity, in their virtues, an example of life. And it has truly been a moment of revival for all of us.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
Machado spoke of her meeting with Pope Leo during a Q&A with reporters in Washington on Friday. She said the Holy Father reassured her that he knows very well what her country is going through.
He knows what the Catholic Church is going through because of the persecution and pressure on our bishops and priests and nuns. And I believe that he's not only concerned but actively helping and supporting a peaceful transitional process to take place.
Machado also shared that the meeting was a very significant moment for her personally as a devout Catholic and called it a day that has marked her life. To discuss Pope Leo's outspoken comments about the situation in Venezuela and Vatican diplomacy on the world stage, we are joined by Francis Rooney, former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See during the George W. Bush administration. Ambassador Rooney served at the Vatican from 2005 to 2008 and has maintained a keen interest in the Vatican's global role. He also served 2 terms in Congress representing Florida's 19th congressional district. Thank you so much for joining us. First, what do you make of Pope Leo's meeting with Venezuelan opposition leader María Corina Machado at the Vatican on Monday ahead of her Thursday meeting with President Trump? What can we read from that?
Well, I think it's predictable that he would want to shore up her position on the international stage as well as he can. So a pre-Trump meeting with the Holy Father is a global expression of her importance right now.
The U.S.'s capture of Maduro is one of the most significant global events since Pope Leo took office. What can we parse so far from his approach to diplomacy on this specific issue?
Well, I think we've seen the example of the same characteristics he displayed many years back at Cassia Hall when I was on the board of the school. He'd come down to the board meetings and he's displayed as head of the Augustinians. He's always calm, he's always careful, and he's very judicious in his comments, but he's always commenting on point.
Absolutely. The Washington Post has reported that the Holy See was involved in last-minute negotiations to grant Maduro asylum in Russia before his capture by the U.S. If this is true, this seems to be an especially engaged role by the Vatican. Why would the Vatican be so invested in Venezuela?
Well, the Holy See has a long tradition, which I put in my book about diplomacy of the U.S. and the Holy See, of intervening in hostage situations and in situations of marginalized people or people under great stress and change, like a regime change. And I think he would like to find a nonviolent solution to the exit of Maduro, if possible.
Pope Leo last week gave what may be his most significant speech to date in his first State of the World address to diplomats at the Vatican. Let's take a listen to a portion of it.
The principle established after the Second World War, which prohibited nations from using force to violate the borders of others, has been completely undermined. Peace is no longer sought as a gift and a desirable good in itself, or in the pursuit of the establishment of the ordered universe willed by God, with a more perfect form of justice among men and women.
While Pope Leo did not call out specific nations here, his speech was seen as a strong critique of U.S. military incursions. What did you learn about Pope Leo's diplomacy style from this speech last week, and how significant was his message there?
Well, I think several times in the short time he's been Pope, he's spoken very clearly. He doesn't speak with the raspy parlance of Pope Francis, but he speaks very clearly and says a lot of the same things. He's willing to call out bad activities by world leaders. He's willing to call out the actions of Trump undermining the post-World War II order and creating potential consequences of bad actions by other people like North Korea, Russia, China. I mean, what's China doing right now? Sitting back thinking, wow, maybe I ought to go get Taiwan.
And yet it doesn't seem, Pope Leo does not yet come off as combative all at the same time. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. He's not at all like Pope Francis. He's calm, deliberate. That expression in the message to the diplomats is totally reflective of the experience I've seen of Pope Leo for 30 years. He's a great leader, but he's a calm, careful person.
Do you think that Pope Leo's American background makes him uniquely positioned to be even more relevant diplomatically in the Western Hemisphere? Is his American identity an advantage to his global diplomacy?
Well, I definitely think it is. You know, the church kind of has a love-hate relationship with the United States. They resent our power, but they love our money. And they love our number of Catholics in the United States. So this is an opportunity for Pope Leo to kind of close that gap, earn more respect for the United States, for the important role it plays in the church, and also in Latin America. I think the fact that he spent all that time in Peru offers an opportunity to regain a lot of lost Catholics that have become evangelicals in Latin America.
You've hit on this already, but I want to give you a chance to reiterate it all the more. You know Pope Leo XIV personally. He is a friend of yours. In fact, you knew him back as Father Bob when you served as ambassador in Rome, and even before that, I believe. What should we know about Pope Leo, or Robert Prevost, as you knew him, that sheds even more insight into how he leads?
Well, I think we can expect him to kind of be more down the middle of the line, picking up some of the doctrinal support areas of Pope Benedict. He's already made some comments about gays and things like that, certainly entitled to attend church, but not necessarily some other activities he's for. And then the more social justice orientation of Pope Francis. He's already spoken a great deal about immigrants and the need to protect marginalized people and now the need to find nonviolent solutions to disruptions to the world order.
Finally, I'd like to get your take on this. In another major meeting this week, the newly installed president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Paul Coakley, met with President Trump on Monday to discuss what was described as topics of mutual concern. According to a social media post from the Archbishop, Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and their wives were also present. So while this was closed to the press, I'd like to ask you, what do you anticipate was a top priority for their discussion this week, and how critical is it for a meeting like this to take place, both for the administration but also for the U.S. Church?
Well, it's obviously important to the Church when the leader of the Catholic Bishops' Conference can go have a one-on-one with the President of the United States. That's a great thing, and it's great that President Trump wanted to meet with him. I'm sure they talked about immigration and some of the activities that are going on. You know, we have alligator Alcatraz down here near where we live, and a lot of migrants are being kicked out of the country who have no criminal record. And I think most Americans would agree that we need workers. And if they've been living here a long time, some of their kids have gone to school with our kids, they should be able to stay and have a orderly and rational plan for citizenship, like President George W. Bush tried to accomplish but didn't get it done. On the other hand, if they're criminals, they should go. And I don't think anybody would argue that we shouldn't police the border and have a strong border. I imagine the president and the Archbishop Coakley spoke about that a great deal.
Francis Rooney, thank you so much for your insights. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
The Venezuela developments continued this week after that meeting with Archbishop Coakley in the White House. Under intense pressure from Trump, Senate Republicans blocked a measure that would have limited the president's ability to conduct further attacks in Venezuela. Last week, in a procedural vote on the War Powers Resolution, 5 conservative lawmakers broke party lines to side with Democrats, citing concerns over the administration conducting its incursion in Venezuela without congressional approval. But when the measure came on the floor again this Wednesday, 2 Republican senators flipped, bowing to pressure from the administration and frustrating their Democratic colleagues.
Marco Rubio just sent a letter responsive to my requests and concerns that certifies, number one, that the United States has no ground troops currently in Venezuela or operating in Venezuela. Number two, that if the administration sought to put ground troops into Venezuela, they would abide by the War Powers Act and they would come to Congress for congressional authorization.
And if this legal basis were so righteous and so lawful, the administration and its supporters would not be so afraid to have this debate before the public in the United States Senate.
The War Powers Act of 1973 requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of sending U.S. forces into hostilities abroad. But the administration maintains its capture of Maduro was a law enforcement operation and does not require congressional approval. Trump sharply criticized the 5 Republicans who sided with Democrats on the measure, holding heated phone calls with each one of them and saying on social media they should, quote, never be elected to office again. Venezuela is but one of several hotspots on the globe right now. News from other areas in crisis ahead on this edition of EWTN News in Depth.
Protesters in Iran brave a brutal government crackdown. Thousands demonstrating against the repressive Iranian regime are dead. Tensions over ICE enforcements continue in the streets of Minneapolis. President Trump threatens to use the Insurrection Act to deploy active duty federal troops against protesting civilians.
Some asked me, what have you done to be appointed to go to Algeria?
And later, a place rooted in ancient Christian history is not the easiest place to practice modern Christianity. We go on a journey to Algeria, home of St. Augustine, one of the most influential thinkers of our faith.
Videos of mass protests earlier this week in Tehran, where tens of thousands of Iranian citizens gathered. What started as demonstrations in Iran among students and merchants over economic woes more than 2 weeks ago has escalated into nationwide rallies calling for the fall of the Islamic theocracy and its supreme leader, the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. But those protests quickly turned deadly as government forces opened fire on unarmed protesters, leaving more than 2,500 people dead and thousands more arrested. Crisis in Iran. The crackdown on unrest is one of the deadliest there in more than a decade. And because of a widespread communications blackout, it's difficult to know just how devastating the crackdown is. But the protests show Iran's oppressive regime, one that has long crushed dissent and fueled terrorist proxies in the Middle East, is more fragile than ever. The few videos that are leaving the country show tense, quiet streets. Even if life in Tehran seems to return to normal, the U.S. continues to weigh military options against the government. The administration told Iranian officials there would be grave consequences if protesters continue to be killed, and placed heavy sanctions on Iranians it believed responsible for the crackdown. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and several Arab leaders have asked Trump to hold off on military action against Iran, but the White House says all options remain on the table. For more insights on the crisis in Iran, we are joined now by Alex Vatanka, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Born in Tehran, he specializes in Middle Eastern regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. Alex is also a senior fellow in Middle East studies at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School. Alex, thank you for being here. What do we know for certain about the violence being leveled against protesters in Iran?
Great to be with you. Look, number one, we've had about 5 big rounds of protests nationwide in Iran over the last decade. Every few years, people come out. Usually what the trigger is economic related. The price of a commodity goes up, or there is, in this case, a currency plummeted. But very quickly, the protesters go from chanting for, economic change to asking for a toppling of the regime. And that's really the story here. You've got a population that's had enough of 7 years now of Islamic Republic. They want a fundamental change. And the other thing about this latest round that really stands out is how bloody the operation to deal with the protesters were at the hands of the regime. They've literally killed thousands of their own people, mostly young people in their teens or 20s. And this really stands out from previous rounds. And you have to wonder if this regime can recover from this.
So just reiterating, this does differ from protests we've seen in the past in Iran. Alex, Trump has urged Iranians to keep protesting. Can you explain why it behooves the United States for these protests to continue? What do you think President Trump is hoping for here?
Look, President Trump has already kind of come out and said he wants to be on the winning side. And when he kind of stepped in at one point during last week, that looked like the protesters might just prevail, if you will, in that fight against the regime. But when the tide turned, the president's sort of messaging has changed. He's now saying that, as long as the regime doesn't execute some of these people arrested, then that's good enough for him. I think fundamentally the debate isn't over in the Trump administration. There's a fight inside the administration in terms of whether Iran is a foreign policy file that should be dealt as a strategic opportunity for the United States to look at this Iranian regime as the Soviet Union in its dying days, that it's on the brink. You just have to nudge it over the cliff, and then you will have a whole different Iran, one that could go back to what Iran was before 1979, a friend of the United States. Now, on the other side, the flip side, you have people saying this could end up being another endless war in the Middle East, and are urging the president to be very careful in terms of his next steps.
We'll be watching that debate within the administration closely then. Alex, you have written that the most effective U.S. tool at this moment is to keep Iran connected to the world and to raise the cost of repression. What do you mean by that, and how can that be carried out?
Look, when nobody's watching because they don't have access, when Iran is in darkness, those dark forces of the regime are getting away with the sort of murder that we've seen, or slaughter of their own people. And if you put the lights back on to the extent possible, it might, you would hope, slow down at least the killing. Now, what can you do? Look at some of the things that folks like Elon Musk are doing, providing free access to internet through technologies like Starlink, enabling the 50,000 people who have the Starlink device inside Iran to freely communicate with the outside world. As these images, the footage of the massacre comes out, that surely will have an impact on international community, and it surely will, tarnish the image of an Islamic Republic that already had a very tarnished image, but it just makes it that much more clear that this is a system that long time ago stopped working for its own people, and it's just fighting for its survival.
It's important to bring it all to the light here. Alex, considering Iran is an Islamic theocracy and fuses religious authority with political power, can you speak to how we're seeing that dynamic play out amid this crisis and these protests? And what does it mean for human rights that dissenters are framed as heretics?
So this is the irony. I mean, the Islamic Republic is born in 1979, 47 years ago. It's a theocracy. It's supposed to bring people to religion. But the hands of the Islamic Republic, they have turned people off religion. So today, Iran technically is a theocracy. In reality, it's the most secular country in the Middle East. In fact, we saw in the protesters a number of mosques being burned. Clerics are regularly attacked in the streets. They need protection. People are angry, not because of the religion as such, but because how religion has been abused by the political class in the Islamic Republic. If I was in the clerical class in Iran right now, and if I wanted to sort of give Islam any hope for existing in the future in this country of Iran, I would say let's get ourselves out of the business of politics as early as we can, because in this case, it really hasn't worked.
That's fascinating how you highlighted the secular culture that is there. Finally, Alex, what indicators are you monitoring that signal key regime insiders are ready to distance themselves from Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader?
I don't think for a moment that the majority of people in Iran want this regime. In fact, I would say 90% do not want it. And I would say of the 10% who are supporters of a regime, another 90% of that probably at this point is just in it because that's where the paycheck comes in. That doesn't mean they necessarily buy into the ideology anymore. So in other words, a lot of folks in Iran, including people inside this regime, are on the fence. They know this is starting to look like a sinking ship. They're looking for an opportunity out. And that becomes a challenge for the opposition in diaspora, the opposition to the extent that exists inside Iran, for countries like the United States, to think of ways to encourage and allow for the defections to happen. Because obviously, Supreme Leader Khamenei is not in the streets doing the killing himself. He needs foot soldiers. Get those foot soldiers to the extent that's possible, those without blood on their hands, off the scene, and then suddenly the 86-year-old Khamenei will be left alone, and I think the future of the regime would be seriously, in doubt.
Alex, thank you so much for your expertise during this ongoing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
From one oppressive government to another, we go now to Hong Kong. Media mogul and Hong Kong democracy activist Jimmy Lai appeared in Hong Kong's High Court this week for pre-sentencing hearings, bringing him one step closer to a final sentence in a years-long legal battle. Lai was found guilty in December of 2 counts of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces under China's national security law and 1 conspiracy of sedition. This hearing was his last chance to lighten his sentence of life in prison. The international community has criticized what has widely been seen as a show trial. During his years-long court battle, the 78-year-old Catholic convert has spent his time in solitary confinement, often without access to the sacraments. Human rights lawyer Nina Shea told EWTN News there is no hope Lai's sentence will be lessened.
I don't have any expectation of leniency. I think that the only way that he can avoid spending the rest of his life, however long it is, and not dying in prison is if there is some kind of deal made with either our government or the UK government, like a trade, like a prisoner trade, for example.
Lai's sentencing date has not yet been announced. During a meeting in South Korea in October, President Trump asked China's Xi Jinping to free Lai. The two will meet again in April, sparking hope that Trump will once again push for Lai's release. News headlines are next in the Week in Review. Tensions, protests, and tough ICE tactics in Minneapolis top headlines in the Week in Review. A week of demonstrations following the ICE shooting of Renee Good has put the city of Minneapolis on edge. And now President Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to bring in active duty soldiers against civilians. That, as the attorney representing Good's family says federal investigators should preserve the evidence because a civil lawsuit is coming.
It's laughable to think that the Goods, that either Renee or Rebecca would be investigated. They are the victims. We're not going to victim blame here. There was a shooter who shot someone who was killed. That's who needs to be investigated.
The attorney for Renee Good says ICE has stated for a year it is trying to round up immigrants who are the worst of the worst, but that Good, an American citizen and mother of 3 children, was the best of the best, and that her shooting was unjustified. As nightly protests continue with tear gas being hurled at residents, at least 6 federal prosecutors in Minnesota have resigned. Reportedly upset, the Justice Department is pushing to investigate Good's widow instead of the ICE agent who pulled the trigger. The Department of Homeland Security continues to defend its officer.
Secretary Noem, are you okay with federal agents and officers violating people's Fourth Amendment rights by asking for papers without reasonable suspicion?
Every single action that our ICE officers take is according to the law and following protocols that we have used for years, that this administration has used, that the previous administration used. They are doing everything correctly.
Noem says she has discussed the possibility of using the Insurrection Act in Minneapolis with the president. It has not been used since 1992, when President George H.W. Bush deployed federal troops to Los Angeles to quell riots in the Rodney King police shooting case. But in that instance, the California governor requested the assistance. In this case, Governor Tim Walz is accusing ICE of creating chaos on the streets of Minnesota. He appealed to President Trump this week to turn down the temperature, and he urged protesters to be peaceful. Nothing yet on the much anticipated Supreme Court ruling on President Trump's broad tariffs, meaning a key part of the administration's economic strategy remains in legal limbo. To the frustration of many court watchers this week, the justices released rulings for several other lower profile cases, despite promising swift action on the sweeping tariffs. The case is a major test of presidential power, and the court's ruling could have a far-reaching impact on the global economy.
Good morning, everyone!
Justices heard a pair of landmark cases on Tuesday, weighing in for the first time on the issue of transgender identifying males in girls and women's sports. Dozens of protesters gathered outside while oral arguments went on for nearly 3.5 hours. The 2 cases concern laws in Idaho and in West Virginia that prevent biological males from competing in sporting events for females. Plaintiffs argue the laws violate their rights under Title IX, a federal civil rights law that bars sex discrimination in educational programs. The conservative justices seemed hesitant to issue a broad ruling, but Catholic legal expert Mary Rice Hassan believes they will side with the states.
Given that half the states are allowing it, allowing transgender girls and women to participate, about half are not, why would we, at this point, just the role of this court, jump in and try to constitutionalize a rule for the whole country while there's still, as you say, uncertainty and debate, while there's still strong interest in the other side?
I think what they're going to say is for Title IX purposes, sex permits female-only sports. I think because the language of Title IX permits that kind of a distinction to be drawn. Now, whether they come up with and side with the real definition of sex as being biological, I don't know. We'll see how that writes out.
The court's decision will likely come this summer. More than half of states have similar laws that maintain girls and women's sports to female students. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is praising a rule change by the Department of Homeland Security that waives the waiting period for religious visas. The move will impact the foreign-born priests that make up nearly a quarter of U.S. clergy. An R1 visa allows foreign religious workers, like priests and religious, to serve in the U.S. for up to 5 years. If that visa is not renewed, they must return to their home country for an entire year. Under the new rule, though, the religious worker must still leave the U.S., but they do not have to wait a full year before applying for a new visa. In a statement responding to the rule change, the USCCB says the value of the religious worker visa program and our appreciation for the efforts undertaken to support it cannot be overstated. This targeted change is a truly significant step that will help facilitate essential religious services for Catholics and other people of faith throughout the United States by minimizing disruptions to cherished ministries. Key results are in measuring the influence of America's 3-year National Eucharistic Revival that helped to reinvigorate understanding of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. The revival began in 2022 as an effort by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to engage more fully in evangelization and to promote a deepening of the faith among Catholics across America. Clergy, staff, and parishioners could participate both locally at the parish level and in national events. Highlights of that included the National Eucharistic Pilgrimage from 4 corners of the United States and the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis in the summer of 2024. A revival impact report was released this week. Its survey of Catholics found the revival had very positive outcomes. At the parish level, 1 year later, there has been a noticeable increase in Eucharistic adoration and parishioner participation in confession. Individuals report a renewed personal focus on the Eucharist itself and a higher comfort level about evangelizing and encouraging others to become more deeply involved in their faith. And the report suggests a future revival could expand reach further with increased support and additional outreach to heighten revival awareness for those in the pews. To discuss the impact report, we are joined now by the chairman of the National Eucharistic Congress, Bishop Andrew Cozzens. He was an integral planning partner in the 3-year revival and is on board now as the bishops look to the future to try to capture and build on this revival enthusiasm. Your Excellency, thank you for being here and being with us. While it is impossible to know for certain all the seen and the unseen good fruit from the revival, we do have these new findings. Were you heartened by what has been found, and what especially stood out to you from this report?
I was extremely heartened by what has been found in our impact study that we did. And, I had a sense that the revival had a big impact on people and especially on our church. But it was great to see that confirmed by the data and to see some of the actual statistics. I think the thing that most stood out to me is that we accomplished our goal. Our goal was really to bring about a missionary conversion of Catholics, right? We wanted Catholics to come together and to experience more deeply a profound love for Jesus in the Eucharist, and then from that to be sent out on mission. And our study showed that, like, anyone who attended one of our National Eucharistic Pilgrimage or National Eucharistic Congress said they were 50% more likely to do outreach, to share their faith, to do some act of service. So it really showed that there was that kind of central impact that we desired, as well as many other things.
Right, and strong gains in Eucharistic devotion, adoration, participation, all good news there. And Bishop, nearly half of the clergy who were surveyed said that they felt more encouraged since the start of the revival. It seems that the Eucharistic revival, including the Eucharistic Congress, was a real morale booster for members of our clergy, with the clergy largely supportive of it. Why is this important for our church, that our shepherds take this enthusiasm for the Eucharist to their flocks?
Well, as we all know, the role that the bishops and the priests play in our church is central. And it was one of the stunning things was the high percentage of buy-in we got, especially from bishops and priests. And priests even saying, they feel like their bishops were fully supportive and fully engaged. And I was so grateful when I saw that priests found it encouraging, They were encouraged by this opportunity to focus on the Eucharist. I know so much more preaching and encouragement about Eucharistic devotion happened in our parishes during this time. But the statistic that really encouraged me was that 70% of priests said that they personally grew in their own devotion to the Eucharist, that they were doing, 50% said they were doing more time in adoration because of the Eucharistic revival. So what a beautiful thing, right? If we know that holiness spreads, And that was always the kind of line about St. John Vianney, was the people around him said, well, we have to be holy because our priest is holy. So if our priests are encouraged and they're drawing closer to Jesus in the Eucharist, that's going to help our people so much, and it's going to help our church so much. And so to me, that was one of the most encouraging things about the study.
Absolutely. Well, one of the challenges that the National Eucharistic Congress event faced was a lack of awareness for a large part of the Catholic population, and the reality that it is difficult to reach people beyond the already engaged and in-the-know Catholic. Any thoughts on how to address that for the next Congress in 2029?
Yeah, of course, we'll keep pushing out on those edges of trying to reach the people who aren't engaged, which is really the great goal. But the main thing, I think, is that that's going to happen through people, right? That most people are evangelized through relationship. And, so as we continue to strengthen the core of our faith and those people who are committed, and they begin to draw closer to Jesus in the Eucharist, what the study showed is that they get on fire and then they start to spread that fire, right? And so it's the way Jesus worked himself, Jesus certainly did preach to crowds, but most of the time he spent with his 12 apostles and with those people who were with him. And because if he could convert and strengthen them, then they could go out and convert the world. And I think that's really the goal of the whole Eucharistic movement that we have now, is strengthening those people so that they can become the witnesses that we're called to be. But you do find the stories, of people who encountered Jesus on a pilgrimage, or many people who came to the Eucharistic Congress, maybe not as completely on fire Catholics, but left as an on fire Catholic. So I think that'll continue to happen. And it's beautiful to think about what happens in this movement over generations, right? If we have this Eucharistic Congress, like I hope we will, every 4 years, what does that do after 5 or 6 of them,
Right. We don't have to wait decades and decades for the next one, fortunately. Bishop, we're seeing the fruits of the revival live on already with a new national Eucharistic pilgrimage route, the St. Francis Xavier Cabrini route, launching this summer from St. Augustine, Florida, in honor of America's 250th year. Your reaction to this initiative, Your Excellency, and can you offer a word of encouragement for American Catholics to consider participating?
Yeah, I think it's such a great providential opportunity to celebrate the gift of our country, right? The gift, and really the gift that the Catholic faith has had on our country, because we're going to start this pilgrimage in St. Augustine, Florida, which is the site of the very first Catholic Mass in our country. And then we're going to do the whole Eastern Seaboard. We're going to hit almost all of the original 13 colonies. We'll go all the way up to Maine. We'll be in Massachusetts. And then we'll end on the 4th of July in Philadelphia, where the celebrations will happen. And so it's a beautiful way for us as Catholics to give thanks to God for our country, but also to witness to our country about the founding principles, which we believe are so important, about the love of neighbor and how to live in a country where we actually do show our love for others in a profoundly Christian way. And so I hope that many people will come and participate, really as a way to pray for our country, but also to witness to our country of the joy and the beauty of our Catholic faith.
Absolutely. A lot to look forward to there. Bishop Andrew Cozzens, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
The countdown is on for the National March for Life, the largest gathering of pro-lifers in the world. Next Friday, hundreds of thousands of Americans are expected to march through the streets of Washington, D.C. to witness to our country that life is a gift and worthy of protection from womb to tomb. EWTN News will, of course, be there providing wall-to-wall coverage. Join me and my co-hosts for EWTN's live coverage of the March for Life from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday, January 23rd. You can catch the broadcast on EWTN or find the live stream on our social media. A celebration of life you won't want to miss. And a much anticipated event at the Vatican this week with a presentation of the papal mosaic portrait to Pope Leo XIV. In keeping with long tradition, the Vatican Mosaic Studio has completed the intricate work of art which will be installed at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. Artisans revealed the mosaic portrait to the Pope this week. The medallion is more than 4 feet round, weighs more than 300 pounds, and is made up of more than 15,000 pieces of glass enamel using an ancient cut mosaic technique. It will be installed in the basilica next to the mosaic portrait of Pope Francis, joining those of every other pope since St. Peter himself. Upon its installation, it will be the only illuminated papal mosaic in the basilica, symbolizing the reign of the current Holy Father. We'll be back in a moment.
It's not like Europe so that we can speak about Jesus to them, but we do little charity which helps them to come close to God.
Next, the modern-day challenge of Christianity in a predominantly Muslim country with an ancient Christian heritage. We travel to Algeria, where St. Augustine once served as bishop, to trace a faith that has endured centuries of change. That report when we return.
It has one of the most complex religious landscapes in the world. Algeria, the North African country where the writings of St. Augustine centuries ago helped to develop Western Christianity, and where now, centuries later, a small and fragile Christian community survives in a predominantly Muslim nation. Foreign correspondent Colm Flynn takes us to Algeria, where he explored the country's ancient Christian heritage and the realities of living as a Catholic there today.
High above the city of Annaba in Algeria, inside the Basilica of St. Augustine, a rare moment is unfolding. Police stand guard outside, while inside the choir sings as Miguel Guillot steps forward and is appointed as the Bishop of Constantine, making him the newest bishop in the country. It's a significant moment for the Catholic Church in a country where less than 2% of the population are Christian. But that wasn't always the case. This is the city of Annaba, which sits on Algeria's northeastern coast, along the Mediterranean Sea. It's a port city shaped by centuries of trade, conquest, and religion. Known in antiquity as Hippo Regius, this was once one of the most important Christian sites in the Roman Empire. In the ruins of that ancient city of Hippo Regius, I'm meeting Khalil Azouni, the director of the archaeological site.
We are now in one of the oldest cities in North Africa, one of the most important ancient cities in North Africa. It was a major city that played a huge role politically, economically, and even religiously.
St. Augustine was the Bishop of Hippo from the year 396 AD until 430 AD, and this is where he prayed and celebrated Mass, in this very basilica, standing on the same tiles and touching the same pillars.
Most of Augustine's writings were composed here, in the Basilica of Peace, Pax Basilica, which, as you can see, many of its architectural elements still exist and are preserved to this day. And still today, Algerian universities place such importance on this site, and excavations are still underway to search for many of the structures mentioned by Augustine, but that we no longer see in the ruins today.
In the late 19th century, this hilltop basilica was built in tribute to the bishop, whose writings would go on to shape Christianity. Father Fred.
Yes.
Good to meet you. How are you?
I'm very fine. You are welcome, Colm.
Father Fred Wikasa is an Augustinian and director of the basilica today.
This basilica was built to help the pilgrims who are coming through here to go to Jerusalem, because in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, there were some pilgrims who were coming from Europe to go to Jerusalem, and when they passed through Hippo, which is Annaba now, there was no church. So it was built for these pilgrims who are passing by so that they have a place to worship.
To learn more about the relations between Muslims and the small minority of Christians here, I go to visit a local mosque, where Kala is the imam. Imam, can you tell me a bit about this mosque here?
Welcome to this place, a place dedicated fully to religion and worship. This place is called Sidi Abu Marwan al-Sharif Mosque in the old city of Annaba in eastern Algeria.
What is incredible about this mosque is that it was once a small house where St. Augustine would stay, and later became a Christian temple from which the pillars still remain today.
What is beautiful is that this place embodies the continuing dialogue between people of different faiths. As we mentioned before, even St. Augustine passed through this site. And I think this is something beautiful. I believe people should embrace these divine, human, and universal values as an example so that they can live together in peace, even if their religious laws differ.
The installation of a new bishop here in Algeria made headlines around the world, especially with a renewed focus on Algeria and St. Augustine given our new Augustinian Pope, Pope Leo XIV. But who is Miguel Guiu, Algeria's newest bishop, and what kind of Catholic church will he be helping to lead? To find out, I travelled to the city of Constantine, one of the most dramatic and historic cities in the country, nicknamed the City of Bridges. Originally from Lyon in France, Bishop Miguel Guiu first arrived in Algeria in 2006.
We are a small number. There is at least 100 kilometers between every parishes. In some of these places, we have no priests, resident priests. For instance, in Béjaïa, maybe there are 30 or 40 Christians. Usually, there can be for the festivals, there can be more. But they have Mass twice a month.
Twice a month?
Twice a month. But I told them, Christian community doesn't start with the presence of a priest. A Christian community starts with the presence of Christians. Yeah. If there is a priest, alhamdulillah, thanks be to God. We are lucky to be in a country who respects the faith and the conscience of the people. Of course, he has to be discreet, not to make scandal. Of course, no proselytism. But they know, the government knows that we are not here to preach the gospel to the people through the words and to disturb people. We are here maybe for two aims: to support the Christians who are here, but also to build bridges of fraternity between Muslims and Christians.
This is something that I heard repeatedly while being in Algeria. The church here is quick to point out that they do not see their mission to convert or evangelize. And when an Algerian does want to convert, they can often face prejudice and social persecution. We had approached a number of converts asking them to speak on camera, but none were willing to do so, except one. As evening sets over Constantine, I sit down for a coffee with 30-year-old Karim Kakar, who tells me about his story. When did you first become aware and interested in Christianity?
Actually, at the age of 7 years, when I was a child, I'm starting going to the church because I'm living not far from the church. I feel like in peace, or feel like I find myself in this place. That's at the age of 18. I started studying catechism with a priest for 3 or 4 years, maybe more, until at the age of 21, I was baptized in Tunisia. Yeah.
When you told your family and your friends that you were leaving Islam and becoming a Christian, what was their reaction?
I guess especially from my family, they don't have idea about Christianity. They're just from Hollywood films, or like they saw American on TV, they drink alcohol, they do sex with any woman find in the street.
Karim says his parents disapproved of his conversion, as they believed being a Christian would make him a worse person in terms of how he lived his life.
Was it difficult?
Yes, it was difficult, especially for them. For me, I guess I have a strong personality. I stay up and they continue, but for them it was like...
Do you ever regret becoming a Christian, becoming a Catholic?
No, I cannot regret. It's a grace from God. I cannot refuse the grace of God.
To try to understand what the future might hold for Christians and the Catholic Church in Algeria, I travel to its capital, Algiers. There I meet Cardinal Jean-Paul Vesco. He is the most senior Catholic in the entire country.
Cardinal, what gives you strength and courage and hope in the work that you do?
I think, I would say the fraternity. I need, for me, I'm not the cardinal, I'm not the archbishop of the Christians, or for the Christians. I am the archbishop and the cardinal for all the Algerians. And so I have this very strong feeling. And so my people, as cardinal, is the people of this country. And I don't want to convert them. I don't, they are mostly Muslim, but then I would like that we can show to the world that we can work together, that we worship the same God, and we can be brothers and sisters.
In Algeria, Northern Africa, Colm Flynn for EWTN News in Depth.
Our thanks to Colm and his crew for these insights from a country where much of the foundation of our Christian heritage was developed. But this report is just a small fraction of the whole story. Join us for much more. Colm's hour-long documentary, Christianity in Algeria, Faith Against the Odds, airs right here next Friday, January 23rd, in this time slot at 8 p.m. Eastern. Finally today, Catholics are called out to live out our faith wherever it takes us, and that includes the end zone. This Monday night, the Miami Hurricanes will take on the #1 Indiana Hoosiers in a historic National College Football Championship. And some players are counting on some heavenly help.
Favorite pregame hype song?
Pre-game, I honestly don't listen to hype songs because I gotta stay calm, cool, and collected. I actually meditate before the game. I meditate, I pray.
That's Indiana's star quarterback Fernando Mendoza speaking on his pregame routine just days before a big win against the Oregon Ducks in the Peach Bowl. A devout Catholic, Mendoza is outspoken about his faith and is quick to praise God for his team's success. After winning the Heisman Trophy, the most prestigious award in college football, he shared it with the Dominican friars who serve Indiana University's Catholic campus ministry. His chaplain, Father Patrick Hyde, spoke to EWTN News about the joys of ministering to Indiana's Catholic football players.
From where we were 2 years ago, where the stands are practically empty, to now playing for the national championship is kind of a surreal experience for all of us long-suffering Hoosier fans. But it's been a real blessing, especially this year, to get to know some of our Catholic players on the team, including our quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner, Fernando Mendoza, and others, and to see not only their success, but also their courageous and zealous sharing of their Catholic faith.
Father Hyde has been blessed to be able to attend both the Peach Bowl and the Rose Bowl to cheer on his Hoosiers. He says he, of course, hopes for a win, but will give all thanks to God regardless of the outcome, and prays for the safety, well-being, and excellence of all the players. That will be a great game to watch. And that's it for this edition of EWTN News in Depth. I'm Catherine Hadro. Next Friday, remember to tune in at this time for Colm Flynn's documentary, Christianity in Algeria, Faith Against the Odds. And earlier in the day, watch EWTN beginning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern for full live coverage of this year's March for Life. Until we see you again, God bless.